This MAGA-controlled Supreme Court has taken so much already. They've eliminated our reproductive freedom, made it harder to prevent school shootings, and allowed greedy corporations to pollute our water. And now another threat we can't ignore. MAGA Supreme Court justices are plotting a relentless power grab to seize even more control over our daily lives and rewrite the rules in favor of the billionaires and corporations that shower them with lavish gifts, while you and your community pay the price for the MAGA justices' agenda. Taking Social Security away from seniors, rolling back basic protections for workers on the job, and even deciding whether we can use safe, effective medications. But united, we have the power to fight back and stop them. Because your members of Congress represent you, and it's time for them to listen. Ask your members of Congress, do you stand with us or the MAGA justices?
And the powerful gain more power at the expense of the American people. And this has been their plan for decades in the making. Many years ago, conservatives started an aggressive strategy to connect dots between the issues on their political agenda and the Supreme Court's role in shaping those issues. With that, they fanned the flames of their base to build power in DC and in states across the country. They pointed the finger and named the politicians on the other side who stood in the way of their anti-abortion, pro-corporate greed agenda, and who appointed justices to the Supreme Court who did the same. We demand accountability. And they made it clear to conservative politicians that the moment they amassed enough power, they had to do anything and everything to finish capturing the Supreme Court. That inaction wasn't an option. We are living with the results of the effort right now, watching the court turn back centuries at a time and gutting our reproductive freedom, labor and voting rights, environmental protections, and gun laws. By now, my friends, it's time to take our power back. Give power back to the people. It's our turn to stand up to the court and demand that Congress hold them accountable. We know that together, we are the overwhelming majority. We are the majority who oppose this broken and captured Supreme Court, has overturned precedent and ignored judicial norms, all to further this dangerous agenda and strip away our freedom. We are the majority who deserve better, but too many of us don't know our power in the fight that we are in right now. Many blame the Supreme Court alone. Some others are pointing the finger at Dems for letting this happen. And far, far too many of us are just throwing up our hands in despair. That's where this campaign comes in. We need to make it very clear with one voice. This Supreme Court did not just happen. It is the Trump MAGA court, empowering too many members of Congress who are on the relentless mission to gain more power. They created this court, but that means that we can fix it. And we all know this, but we need to spread the word. So as we talk about tonight, our goal is to stop this relentless power grab by connecting the dots between the court's decisions and the consequences in our day-to-day lives, and empowering people all across the country to demand that their members of Congress fight for our freedoms by fixing this broken and corrupt Supreme Court. Today's speakers We'll fill you in on how this Supreme Court's decision can impact us all. The ways from former President Trump and many members of Congress made this court possible. And critically, how you can help change the trajectory we're on. And make no mistake, we really can fix it. After discussing what's at stake, we'll talk about the work ahead and the fight for our freedoms to make sure that over the next several months, our members of Congress hear from us and are held accountable for their actions or inaction. Because right now, our members of Congress have a choice. Stand with their constituents by committing to fix the court, or stand with the MAGA court by allowing their relentless power grab to go unchecked. People from across the country are asking, who are elected officials standing with? And we're demanding answers. So thank you for joining us tonight. And I'm convinced that we can even be more relentless than this MAGA Supreme Court. And I'm hopeful that by the end of the night, you will be too. To kick off our discussion and help us understand what the Supreme Court has done so far and how its decisions have and will continue to undermine our rights and freedoms, I'm thrilled to introduce our panel. Alexis McGill-Johnson, President of Planned Parenthood Action Fund. Patrick Gaspar, CEO of Center for America Progress Action Fund. Santiago Mayor, President of Voters of Tomorrow. Abril Gallardo Silveira, Chief of Staff at Lucha. Thank you all for joining, and we appreciate your time. So I want to start our questions. And to get us started, let's go to you, Patrick, the CEO of CAP, Center for American Progress Action Fund. So you all have been ringing the alarm on the Supreme Court attacks to our rights and freedoms. And now we're actually living in the things that you have talked about for so long. And the scary thing is that there's still more yet to come. And we at times can easily just feel stuck. Can you talk to us a little bit about how we arrived at this moment and how we can meet it at the stakes that continue to rise in this moment? All right. Well, this is why live television or live stream is fun. Okay. While we get Patrick back, we're going to move over to my friend and sister in the fight, Alexis McGill-Johnson, the president and CEO of Planned Parenthood Action. So, Alexis, I mean, you've had to be living under a rock not to know what the attacks on abortion and freedom rights are. And it's scary. We've seen the court overturn Dobbs. We've seen the Supreme Court in states attack abortion rights, even IVF. And thankfully, because of the work that you and so many folks on this call have done in 2022 and 2023, we saw people across the country stand up and make our voices heard about these issues and this relentless power grab that really started with the Supreme Court. And now many conservatives, even extreme ones, realize the error of their ways and are trying to distance themselves from this action. So what are the lessons that we can learn from the fights that we've had over reproductive rights and who's responsible for it? And then what are the other issues that the Supreme Court, how the other issues that the Supreme Court has heard in America, from guns to the environment, LGBTQ plus rights, immigrant rights, voting rights, and so much more? What are some of the lessons that we can learn tonight?
Oh, well, Ashley, it's great to be here. And that is why you are such the pro to organize us here in conversation. You know, look, I mean, I think the moment for reproductive rights is a prime example, right, of how our democracy is not functioning, right? And the way we are fighting back is also a real example of how we can restore democracy. And it's not an accident that reproductive rights and freedom, abortion, and democracy are the themes and have been for the last several years, because if you cannot control your own bodily autonomy, if you cannot access your vote and your voice, you are not able to actually fully participate in the democracy. And so, I think it's critically important to understand that the last couple of years have been shocking, and also that we didn't get here overnight. And so I think the first lesson that I have is, that this work takes time, right? That movement work, really building back power is long term. The opposition spent the last 50 years undermining democratic institutions, taking over courts, and really cementing in a political advantage that was expedited by gerrymandering and taking over state houses and packing courts with anti-abortion judges. But the lesson there, and it's not the lesson we should follow, but it's the one we should understand, is that the opposition was willing to sacrifice democracy, sacrifice democratic institutions for the sake of more power and control. And that's why our federal courts have become the weapons that they are to take away our rights and our freedoms. So earlier today, I was at a rally in front of the Supreme Court, as I was a month ago. Today's threat was speaking against the latest threat on our bodies. Idaho, the state of Idaho, is literally arguing for the right to deny patients emergency abortion care, even if it means that it could stabilize their lives, or even if it means that they could die. So let me say that again. The Supreme Court will soon decide if our opponents really have the right to let us die because they disagree with abortion care. It's that simple. And last month, as you know, anti-abortion activists were suing the FDA, trying to roll back access to medication abortion. And the impact of that isn't just about what could happen in Texas and Alabama or in Idaho, but also New York, California, and Illinois. Right? These have implications nationwide. And I think really understanding how these rollbacks have happened are not being isolated in a federalist, framework of just the impact into states. It affects all of us, right? It affects all of our ability to travel, all of where we will be. And I think those are, the real implications for that. I also think that while these decisions have been incredibly unpopular with the American people, I think that's what you are seeing right now with why all of these politicians in the opposition are trying to fight back. They're trying to roll back this tide that they have seen, because everywhere that abortion has been on the ballot, reproductive freedom has won, and it's the way in which I think our democracy will be saved, because it means now you have to know who your state Supreme Court seat, who's sitting in that seat, who's sitting in the DA seat, who's sitting in, who's your member of Congress, who is your senator, but all up and down the ballots, these issues have become very particularly personal because they affect our lives and our bodies. And so I do think that it's so important right now that we not only are talking about the takeaway of rights, the takeaway of fundamental constitutional right, but also the real opportunity to not just win elections, but strengthen the democracy in the process, and really begin to chip away at their structural advantage in ways that I think are going to be so important as we move forward.
Thank you, Alexis. And we are with you. We are fighting alongside you. We thank you for your leadership and all the folks who are fighting for our reproductive rights. I want to turn it now back to Patrick. Welcome, Patrick. We have been talking, Alexis was talking about some of the lessons that we can learn from the reproductive rights work, and since Dobbs has been overturned. And your organization, the Center for American Progress Action Fund, has been sounding the alarms for some time about the moment that we can find ourselves in. And so here we are, and yet so much more can actually happen. And so I'm wondering if you can, sometimes you can't solve the problem unless you know how you got there. So I'm wondering if you could unpack for a little bit, as one is how did we arrive at this moment that we are in, and how can we meet it as the stakes continue to rise?
Ashley, thank you so much for welcoming me into this extraordinary community. Thank you for the warm introduction, and thank you for giving me the impossible task of having to follow my sister Alexis, who of course laid down the gospel already. I'll do my best to give us a sense of how we arrived here and how I think we need to dig out of the hole that we're in, and to affirm a vision that includes all of us. So I'd say actually that we got here through a coordinated, ruthless campaign orchestrated by far-right MAGA Republicans. These lawsuits to take away our most fundamental rights, freedoms, and protections are propelled by a constellation of extreme right-wing dark money organizations funded through conservative power brokers, like that billionaire who can't seem to stop taking Clarence Thomas off on vacation. The rash of Supreme Court decisions handed down by this court is alarming because it's so bitterly divorced, Ashley, from what the American people actually want. So now, as we the people, it's our job to rise up, impose our will on the arc of justice. And even though we can't hold the Supreme Court directly accountable through direct elections, we can hold Congress accountable for holding that court to its actual mandate. And that's exactly what we're aiming to do. So I want to, Ashley, thank broadly everybody who's worked behind the scenes to shoulder this effort to get us all rolling in the right direction. And I want to remind us, as so many have proven in the reproductive justice space, that this is a fight that we can actually win. I truly believe that all of our voices together can help rein in this court. Why do I believe it? Because I've taken part in enough movements to understand the power of organizing. From all that's happened to center women and outcomes in our society, the civil rights progress that we've made. It's clear that generation by generation, Americans have risen to the challenge to take on oppressive systems. And the way this court is constructed has to be described as an oppressive system. At this moment, these extremists are simply trying to roll back all of the rights-based framework that we've put a scaffolding around ever since the 1964 Civil Rights Act to this present. So we need to let Congress know loudly and clearly that this rash of political, and it is political, reckless, draconian decisions by this court to take away rights driven completely by a lack of accountability can go on no longer. So I want to just very quickly talk about accountability, talk about bad faith, and how we move forward. On the question of accountability, I'd remind everybody here in this beloved community that the lion's share of decisions by this court are contradictory to the values held up by the majority. 74% of Americans support licenses for concealed carry, for instance, but the Supreme Court invalidated a law in New York that required those licenses. 80% of Americans favor tougher restrictions on carbon emissions from power plants. But in West Virginia versus EPA, this Supreme Court said the EPA lacks the authority to cap carbon emissions. 85% of Americans actually support the right to abortion in at least some circumstances. But after a half century, we know, of course, what this court did to Roe versus Wade. So this is really a court that ceased acting in good faith some time ago. But let's all understand that these MAGA Republicans didn't just luck into having a Supreme Court that's willing to flout every precedent. Conservative elites have long understood that if they could get their people into high-ranking judicial positions, they could unleash unchecked power over time. This is the result of a long-term coordinated effort, not just in the Supreme Court, but in the state courts and district courts and appeals courts. So make no mistake about it. When Alabama bans IVF and Arizona tries to revive an abortion ban that was passed during the Civil War, Republicans can try all they want to distance themselves from these decisions, but they're being made by jurists who rose through the ranks as a consequence of these coordinated efforts. You all know what's at stake already, so I'm not going to rehearse what's at stake, but I want to just take a minute, Ashley, to call us to some action. Recently at CAP, we conducted a set of focus groups. And I remember one of the participants in those focus groups saying something that really resonated with me. She said that it felt as if we had all just awakened one morning and the Supreme Court had taken away all of her rights. She asked, what rights will I wake to find taken away tomorrow? We need to do something to stop that so we don't have to worry about all of this. We all agree with her. So we're going to call on Congress to check this out of control court. Senators who voted to confirm extreme justices on the court have to own those decisions as all of us head to the ballot in November. We need common sense measures like term limits for justices and a binding code of ethics, one that requires recusal when a justice's impartiality may be reasonably questioned, one that prohibits justices from receiving gifts and owning individual stocks, and one that requires greater transparency. We need legislation, Ashley, that codifies an end to judicial shopping and court shopping. We need protections for agencies enshrined into law so the courts can't grab power from other branches of government. Our system relies on those meaningful checks and balances that have been absented from this court in this moment. When Donald Trump left office after losing the 2020 election, that was our system of checks and balances at work, but that system is fraying. So far, Congress has abdicated its responsibility to check this court. It's up to us to let them know enough is enough. This is a moment that demands not despair, but mobilization, not resignation, but resolve, with a clear-throated, relentless movement driven by common sense. I believe, and I know you believe, that we have the power to make this Congress listen. So thank you for letting me jump in to your conversation, and Godspeed to all of us. We're going to get this done.
Thank you, Patrick. And I'm actually hearing a theme here between Alexis and you, is that some of these folks want to take us back to a time when many of us on this call would not have rights. And this was a plan that these mega donors, that far right extremists for the last 40 years put into play that is now being actualized. And the reality is that, Santiago, I want to bring you into this conversation, because the reality is that a lot of the decisions that are happening in this very moment will outlast many of the folks that are sitting in the judiciary now, but will have impact for young people that are engaged in this political system. So can you talk about how what the court is doing now is going to impact young people and their political engagement for this election and beyond?
For sure. And thank you, Ashley, for the opportunity to talk about it. I don't think I can put a better spin on the Supreme Court than what Alexis and Patrick did, but I can take sort of the young person angle here. And I think one of the big things that hasn't really been discussed is that we still don't know how all of these decisions will play out on the long term, right? We have a lot of really good estimates, but we don't know how it looks in 30, 40, or 50 years. But what we do know is that young people aren't going to stand by while the Supreme Court continues to come after their rights, because let's not mince words here. What they have done over the past few years has been declare war on young Americans' most fundamental freedoms, whether that's the freedom to choose, whether that's the freedom to live in a world that has clean air and clean water, whether that's a freedom to be free of gun violence. The Supreme Court has repeatedly ruled against the interest of young people. And while a lot of people are concerned about young people not seeing this or not engaging with it, what we actually see in the data is very different. Our polling shows that after the Dobbs decision, 7 out of every 10 young Americans talked about it with their friends, with their families. This is a level of engagement that is really hasn't been matched in American political history. And we saw it in 2022. That's why young people came out and voted and had the second highest midterm in over 50 years. We're seeing it right now with the level of political engagement across our generation. And the bottom line is that the Supreme Court is awakening a new generation of democracy defenders that are going to rise up and fight for our freedom, for our rights, and against this backsliding of democratic authority that, like Alexis very diplomatically put it, the opposition, because it is really a far-right attempt to sort of squash our opposition to a lot of the progress that they've been trying to make. They have been, time after time, squandering our freedoms to please their billionaire donors, squandering our rights to please their own ideological goals. And if the court continues to erode Americans' freedoms and take power away from the American people, then young people will be mobilized in the streets like we saw in 2022. Will be mobilized at the polling place like we saw in 2020 and 2022, and how we will see it this November. There is no thing that the Supreme Court can do right now that will increase their credibility amongst Gen Z other than change their rulings and change the way that they are doing their rulings, other than engaging with young people and ruling in the way that young people deserve a Supreme Court to rule in. I think what we have seen over the past few years is a far-right attempt to again, declare war on Gen Z. And what we are seeing right now is Gen Z declaring war back. And if there's any question about it, let me tell you, Gen Z will win this war because we have the one thing that many people in the Supreme Court don't have, and that's time.
That's a mic drop. That's what you call there. Okay, thanks, Santiago. And I want to bring you into this conversation now because to our own detriment, for a long time, progressives did not think that the court were a motivating factor for our voters. And so we didn't talk about it. People thought it was wonky or too esoteric, too removed from everyday life. But the work that you guys have done at Lucha really has been counter to that narrative. You were able to engage an electorate in the state of Arizona on issues like immigration or in guns and now abortion and so much more. And you channel voters' frustration into change. So can you talk about, we've heard about this on a national level and with young folks, but can you talk about specifically on the state level, what have you been able to do and what lessons can we learn from the work that you all have been able to do that can be applied in other states and in DC?
Yes, thank you. And thank you everyone for sharing. Yes, Arizona has been a hotbed for court decisions that have attacked and undermined the well-being of immigrant communities of color, women. And like the reality is that whether it's the Arizona Supreme Court or the US Supreme Court, both are failing to represent the values and the opinions and the vast majority of Arizonans and most Americans. And so specifically, in 2010 here in Arizona, after winning DACA, Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, which was, relief for dreamers or immigrant youth, we saw Arizona court immediately block the access of them having access to a driver's license. Fortunately, we were able to appeal and we won, and now we are able to have driver's licenses. But then later on, we see the U.S. Supreme Court struck down DAPA, which was protection for the parents of immigrant youth. And in 2020, we saw the Trump administration challenge DACA, and we're still waiting on the courts to decide the future. And I think what's important here, what I want to really share in this with this example is that this is not a coincidence, right? It's a very strategic and parallel strategy that the courts are having. People say the courts are not political, but we see that states are sending their most anti-immigrant litigation to the Fifth Circuit Court, for example, which happens to be the most anti-immigrant court of the circuits. And so that's just an example around immigration and how they're using the courts to attack immigrant communities. Then we see, in 2022, the Roe versus Wade, and then in 2023, the blockage of the student loan relief for many folks who, could be using that to buy their first home. And most recently here in Arizona, we saw a few weeks ago, the Arizona Supreme Court upheld a Civil War era abortion ban that was passed when women couldn't even vote, when slavery was still legal. And so I think for us, through every devastating court decision, what I know that is true is that Arizonans have looked to organizations like Lucha, where we have become a political home for those who are fed up with this broken system, and for folks who are looking to turn their anger and their frustration and despair into action. And so we are ready for tangible and meaningful actions to defend our communities and stand up a court system from Arizona to DC that seems to be stuck in the 60s, while the rest of the country is in the 21st century. And so we are organizing, we've been in intentional conversations with our communities for over a decade now. helping our communities really learn about the impact of their local government, and that includes the courts, and what is their impact that they have in their everyday lives. We're going to be knocking on 1 million doors, so having hundreds of thousands of conversations. We are already at the door, and people are concerned about, how they're going to put food on their table, keeping the roof over their heads, and how the added stress that courts are bringing to them, instead of alleviating some of that burden that our communities are facing. And so there's a lot of that stake. We're leaving it all in the field. We're going to make sure that this November we expand the abortion rights with the ballot initiative. We're going to elect champions like the organizer Raquel Terán to Congress, but we're also going to be supporting our local partners, Progress Arizona, with a no campaign. So this November in Arizona, voters will be able to retire Supreme Court Clean Bullock and Catherine Kings. We're part of the Supreme Court who made the decision here in Arizona to enact that terrible abortion law again. And so thank you so much. And I think more and more political education, so our community members understand the impact the courts are having in their everyday lives, is so vital in this moment.
Well, okay, that was a lot. Our speakers really painted a clear picture of what we are up against. But the reality is, with all that we have just learned, there are still more damage this MAGA court can do. The good news is, though, is that we have leaders like the folks on this call getting us in order, getting us information, to do a Beyonce shout out, to say we have work to do and we can get it done. So I want to thank our speakers, Patrick, Alexis, Santiago, and Abril, for saying what needs to be said, for making it very clear for the moment that we are in. And fortunately, there is a way for you to engage. With all the rising stakes, there is a campaign around the Relentless power grab that Jessica Britton from Action Together NEPA is going to talk to the next set of really incredible movement leaders to talk about how you can get engaged, what to do. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to my co-host, Jessica.
Thank you so much, Ashley, and thanks to all of the amazing folks who have spoken already. As the organizing director of Action Together Northeast PA, we are a grassroots organization of neighbors, students, advocates, and workers in Northeastern Pennsylvania. This speaks right to the fears and right to the urgency that people are feeling across the country. As our team knocks on every door and calls every phone number, we're inspired to fight for a court and for a democracy that our community members really deserve. We deserve a court that protects our freedoms to make our own healthcare decisions, including abortion care. We deserve a court that protects our freedom to build our families with who we love and know that we have equal access to care for each other. We deserve a court that protects our freedom to be heard at the ballot box and to be heard in our workplaces. And I'm angry and I'm frustrated that this isn't the current reality, but I'm really hopeful. I deeply believe that if we continue the work of harnessing the power of our communities to demand the changes that we know we need, a better court is truly possible. That starts with amplifying our collective voices in a period where we and constituents across the country have more leverage to hold our members of Congress accountable to using their authority to fix the broken Supreme Court. I'm excited to say that that's exactly what Action Together NEPA is getting to work doing. On Sunday, we hosted our very first rally in very cold weather to amplify the story of gun violence survivors, veterans, parents bearing the weight of the Supreme Court's harms, and we're getting ready to do it again. We will do it again on May 11th. We're going to answer the need we heard at the doors in previous years when we were canvassing with another canvassing program to show our community how they can join us in this fight. we're getting to work on this because we know that there's a path forward. And I'm very excited to welcome a number of amazing leaders who are paving it. We'll be joined by Randy Weingarten, president of the American Federation of Teachers, Yvonne Gutierrez, the president and CEO of Reproductive Freedom for All, Maggie Acosta, field director of Worker Power, Noelle Candelaria, the secretary treasurer of the National Education Association, and Ezra Levin, the co-executive director of Indivisible. So, Randy, I'd like to start with you. It seems that every winter you're out there bundled up outside the Supreme Court, imploring us all to pay attention to the schemes of the court. And then every summer you're out there again, outside the Supreme Court building in the DC heat, once the justices are making good on their threats. So we're probably in agreement that enough is enough, right?
Yeah.
Either
at least we know the four seasons.
Exactly.
although I think Washington D.C. really only has two.
Probably just two. But one thing that we do know for sure, even if that one's probable, is that it's time for Congress to make a choice. Yeah. They can either stand with their constituents by committing to fix the court, or they can stand with the MAGA justices by enabling their relentless power grab. What do you want Congress to know as they weigh that important choice?
So, thank you thank you for the question. But I think that the panel before so articulately talked about what the problems are and the stakes are. And, I'm looking at Ezra as I'm saying this because Ezra taught me a lot after the 2016 election by Indivisible putting out an action guide to people. I think we have to, it's clear we want Congress to fix this, but Congress is not going to fix this unless we find ways to exercise power to get them to fix it. And I think sometimes the frustration is, or maybe I start as a social studies teacher and as a labor organizer, but the frustration is, in this day and age, we think a powerful speech or a powerful thread or tweet is going to fix things. That's not going to fix things. It's organizing that's going to fix things. But before you can organize, you have to educate. And so I'm going to start with a lesson that I learned teaching, which is you meet kids where they are, not where you want them to be, but you meet them where they are. Listen, you meet them where they are. I would say that's the same for all Americans, and that it's not what's said, it's what's heard. So what we did earlier today by explaining the impact of these decisions has hurt our freedoms, may have, helped gazillionaires' freedom, it may help corporations' freedom, but it has hurt all of our freedoms with each and every one of these decisions. The labor decision is now on curtailing strikes, is now meant that we now have suit after suit against us on the penalties for doing a perfectly legal strike. All of what Patrick said about the other decisions, what's happening in Arizona, the abortion going back to the 1800s. We have to find ways, like Ezra, like Indivisible did, of explaining things to people so that they get it. Because once that happens, then we have the power of the people all together doing it. And the second piece is that we have to make it real on election day. It has to be real to the people. Yes, we have to take on gerrymandering too. We have to take on the exercise of the vote, but we have to make it real. And if we win enough in November, it's going to be real, because it's going to be about freedom, and it's going to be about democracy, and it's going to be about it is not okay that somebody can keep their freedom and take the rest of our freedom away. And so the way in which we change Congress is to do the power of the people. But that means we have to exercise it on election day, but start with educating people about what's really at stake and connect the dots and do it in a way that people will hear it. Trust beats truth, unfortunately, each and every day. And that's why our communities together can actually make a huge difference.
Thank you so much. You could not be more accurate about what we need to do. And you talked about making it real for people. So I think that's a perfect opportunity to pull in Yvonne. Yvonne, Reproductive Freedom for All is doing so much to fight back against this court, and we're already seeing very, very real results from that work. Can you talk to us a bit about what is at stake as we work over the next 6 months? And we'd love to hear your perspectives on how all this work we're doing in 2024 will build power and leverage and set us up for big policy wins in 2025.
Well, Jessica, thank you so much for having me. Our president and CEO, Minnie Timoraju, could not make it this evening, so I'm happy to be here in her stead. Listen, what's at stake over the next 6 months? Democracy. I think we all know that. I think we feel that every day, and I could not agree with Randy more that it is about organizing. As I know we'll talk about this more as well, that we really need to ensure that we're engaging, informing, really mobilizing our communities also around what we can win. I think that, you know, the scare tactics, I mean, that's real. Like what we saw under the previous administration, what we know the dangers of this next administration, what a Trump administration could mean, that is real. But if we're not talking about what we can actually win and the rights that we can win back, we know that 8 in 10 people in this country support access to abortion. And if we can get them excited and energized around the power of building power to both gain back access to abortion, to think about what we can actually win. We talk about voting rights, we talk about access to the polls, if we talk about every issue that we know is going to be on the ballot this election, and that what we can actually do if we know what a Biden administration can do, and the future. What does the future look like? What would it actually mean if we had, a filibuster-proof majority, right? Like these are big things that I think that people really need to hear. And they also need to, really too, about the nomination of judges. And, the opportunity that we have, and I think it's always been very exciting when we hear folks talk about, imagine if we had more teachers on the court. Imagine if we had, folks who really understand communities, folks who really truly care about equity, fairness, and integrity, not billionaire special interests or extremists who are in their pocket. What can we actually gain, and how can we think about those judges and who those judges can be? We know that in the next 6 months, we need the Senate to confirm all pending federal judicial nominations and work with the White House to make sure that we've got the senators to announce those new nominations before the election. And more on SCOTUS accountability. I think that, the team here and the work that's been done, but, folks know loud and clear, we can no longer rely on our nation's highest court to protect our fundamental freedoms. They're, in fact, stripping them. So what does the alternate future look like? And that is in our hands. That is about power building. And that's where people really need to see us. And we need to stand for that. We have to bring energy and in order to mobilize. And I think, as we look at what we can win in 2025, I think a lot about what we could lose, like DOJ enforcement decisions, administration approvals, like all of these things that can seem really, really scary. But I do think when we think about what a trifecta could mean in regard to the legislation that we can pass, we saw very starkly in 21 when we were not able to get things done because we were not able to get, a filibuster. That I think was a moment in which folks felt like, oh, we have a trifecta, maybe we can't get it done. So what is it going to take? Like, let's bring that energy of what we can actually win. And we think about that all the time. We've had conversations with folks on the call about, like, let's dream big. Let's think about what building power can get us, and let's energize folks around it, especially when it comes to our rights and gaining back our rights. And also just, I was so glad to hear on the previous panel to think about, young people are going to be around a long time. They are going to be able to talk about holding folks accountable. This is our moment, and I really just hope folks can really feel the power that we have in this moment to see a win and what winning feels like.
Thank you so much, Yvonne. Thanks for joining us. I think I inadvertently gave you a promotion, so you're welcome for that. But we really appreciate you sharing that message with us. And I think it's so easy to talk about all of the things that we can lose, and that's very important. But what we don't talk enough about is what we can win. And I think moving to Maggie with worker power, we can really talk about the consequences of what winning looks like. Our communities are fighting countless uphill battles, and just getting from day to day can be a huge battle. Powering through long hours on the job, struggling to put food on the table after that, and pay off your bills as corporate greed just jacks up the prices again and again. As we navigate those challenges presented by this court, we're proud to have worker power help lead the fight to stop the relentless power grab in Arizona. So, Maggie, why is this fight important to your mission, and how are you working to win it? We'll give Maggie a second to unmute.
Okay, sorry, I was muted and I wasn't paying attention on that. But
Okay.
yes, as a worker power person, I am one of those workers. I come out of one of those shops that it was like working long hours, low wages, that I decided to fight for better wages, to fight for health care, for affordable housing, making sure that we can put a food on our table and not have to worry about it. It's like making sure that we can do only one job instead of multiples, just to be able to meet, have our a good living. Though it's like one of the things that we do is make sure that as we go out and outdoors is talk to these people and let them know that their voices are being heard, and they can and that their voice and vote count. We've got to let them know that this awful MAGA Supreme Court keep ruling against our workers. And that is one of the reasons that, yes, just yesterday, we launched a campaign here in Arizona. And we launched it with only 5 canvassers. But as we are doing this, these canvassers are talking to voters and asking them to email their elected officials, asking them to stand up to this MAGA Supreme Court. Out of that is like just yesterday, it's like this canvassers, out of the people that they talked to, it was 34 already emailed that that message to their elected officials. And 11 of them, they put out the "Stop the Relentless Power Grab" yard signs. It was so powerful just to see all these pictures coming in where they're doing this work. And this is the way, just talking to our voters out there, it's like that's the way we're gonna keep on building power and stop this. But it's like, as I've got to echo what Randy and Yvonne were saying, it's like these people, many of them, it's like, yes, they would need to be talked to and they need to be educated, because many is they're giving up, and we need these voters to get active again.
Thanks so much, Maggie. And coming from a grassroots organization myself, there's no number of canvassers that's too small to do really, really important work. So thanks for sharing that. Thinking about, tis the season for canvassing. We're moving, further into the spring, and as June approaches, I want to bring Noelle into the conversation. Supreme Court decisions loom. We hold our breath, wondering if the rights and the freedoms that we woke up with will be taken away from us before lunchtime. As June approaches and the weather gets warmer, we're reminded of hot labor summer and the power of collective action. It's no surprise that the same billionaires and corporations that try to undermine employees' voices in their workplaces are also leaning on their allies in the court to rewrite the rules, sidestep the will of the people. Noelle, what can we learn from both the corporate playbook and the union power building playbook in the fight to fix the court?
All right, muchísimas gracias. Thank you, Jessica, for that question. I think we know that now more than ever, we must lean in, right, and show our members and other labor siblings that the collective power of unions is immense, especially right now, right? That power is critical right now because the power to organize, the unorganized, which we're seeing sweep across the country as unions, as we organize our own members and communities to get out to the polls and vote, that's going to be critical coming this November. We saw that corporations and billionaires, they had their advocate in the White House, right? He was able to swing the podium, that pendulum, with the Supreme Court in just 4 years. And we've heard a lot about the Supreme Court this evening, but just 2 years ago, right? Because it's important for folks to know and understand, we've seen a lot of cases from the Supreme Court, but when it comes to education, in a 6-3 decision in Carson versus Macon, right, they breached the separation between church and state by requiring states to fund private religious schools if they fund any other private schools, even if those religious schools would use public funds for religious instruction and worship. All of this against the backdrop of public schools across the country continuing to grapple with budget shortfalls and misleading attacks from far right-wing agitators over classroom lesson plans, banning books. The Supreme Court has moved to further undermine public education by opening the door for states to divert more public tuition dollars to private religious schools through those voucher schemes. And we've seen the damage that it can do to state budgets. Randy earlier talked about Arizona and what we're seeing right now, but we should look at Arizona as a cautionary tale as well for education because of what the Supreme Court did. They now have universal vouchers. And the first year, they estimated that in their 2023 budget for universal vouchers, it was going to be about $33 million. It was actually an astounding $550 million. From 33 that they were planning for to $550 million. And this year, that new estimate is almost $1 billion. Right, which is not going to students in public education and instead going to over the 75% of families whose kids were already in private schools. See, but we know that every student in America deserves to attend a great public school, and the court's decision to allow those tax dollars to be diverted from public education to religious education only makes it that much more difficult for all students, no matter their race, their zip code, their background, to receive that quality education they deserve. And right now, when we're talking about the threats to democracy, privatizing public education is the greatest threat to our democracy. And what we need to do and explain to our members is that in order to be able to course correct, right, we need to make sure that we re-elect President Biden, the most pro-labor and pro-public education president in the modern era. We need to make sure we get him back to the White House this November. And with Biden in the White House, we can work to continue to get judicial nominees that look more like our country, right, that are diverse in their background, in their experience, ethnicity, and lifestyle, but not just in the Supreme Court, but across the entire federal bench system, because only a fraction of those critical court cases actually get to the Supreme Court, and many of them are at the federal level. So this not only means that we need to keep Biden in the White House, but we need to do our best to hold on to the Senate, right? That means that we're getting people registered to vote, and we're driving them out to vote. Because the far right, they had patience. When the time came, they were ready. But we need to understand the urgency of now, right? We know the damage that the Trump administration did during his tenure, but we can't afford to have that happen again. This time, as he has stated, with revenge and retribution. We cannot let that happen. We need to be able to take back this country and keep driving it forward, to keep ensuring that all of our students receive that quality public education they deserve, but also ensure that our rights continue to be protected and expanded in this country, so that we can truly live up to the aspirations of what our Constitution is all about.
Thank you so much, Noel. And you talk about the urgency of now. That's a perfect transition to, we're going to take the last question to Ezra. Ezra, first of all, proud Indivisible member myself. Indivisible made up of thousands of group leaders, more than 1 million members, I believe, all across the country. So I'm sure you've heard all of these same fears lots and lots of times. Your organization was built on and is sustained by the premise that even in the face of all of those fears, we can find hope, and it should be channeled into real action. So, talking about the urgency of now, why is now the time to use our collective power to fight back?
Thank you, Jessica. Thanks for pulling us all together. And I think it is somewhat unfair to make me follow after Randy and Yvonne and Maggie and Noel, these towering figures in the fight for justice. I will do my best, but just to be on the same panel with you all is such an honor. Randy, I about have to pull myself up off the floor after that compliment you gave at the beginning. But to get into it, so yes, Indivisible, we've got thousands of locally led volunteer groups all across the country. They started in response to Trump's election. They are in blue states, red states, purple states. They're in urban centers, exurban, rural. They're everywhere. And as you can imagine, for a distributed grassroots movement like that, they've got a lot of opinions about everything, not always aligned on everything. But one place where we see high levels of alignment, where they prioritize it the most, is in this concern for democracy itself. We see it everywhere, in every part of the country where we have Indivisible groups organizing. And these folks got started. They were largely not politically active before 2016, but they got into it because they saw Trump and MAGA as a fundamental threat to our democratic republic. That's why they're in this. That's why they've been organizing for 7 years. And I can't think of a place where that fundamental threat is clearer than in Trump's successful effort to pack the court with right-wing MAGA ideologues. Now, I don't want to be redundant, but just to say, we've heard on this call, they've overturned Roe, they've gutted the Voting Rights Act, they're opening up the floodgates to discrimination, they're preventing any effort to make it harder to prevent school shootings, so much more. Don't need to state it again. Everywhere, everybody on this call knows exactly who's to blame. It's these MAGA extremists on the court, and it's the MAGA extremists in Congress who put them there. Everybody involved in setting this policy knows that the MAGA agenda is deeply unpopular. They know it's deeply unpopular with the American people. That's why they're using the court. That's why they're using the court. I even hesitate to call it the court. I think of it as a miniature MAGA Senate that unilaterally writes new national policy for 333 million Americans. And so everybody is here because we know we can't afford to allow this rigged Supreme Court to pursue this extremist agenda. Our rights, our freedoms, our democracy, all of that hangs in the balance, as we heard Yvonne say, that this is what we're fighting for right now. So this court's bad. It's bad. But being bad is not enough for a people power campaign. And that's the point I think of this panel. What can we actually do about it? There's a lot of bad stuff in the world. That's half of a campaign, identifying something that's bad. But you don't build a movement around recognizing that things are bad. You build a movement around making things better. So how can we make it better? For this particular issue, I go back to the Constitution. Where is the power of the court? Where is the power of the legislature? And how can the people influence both? Court very clearly said in the Constitution, doesn't have the purse, doesn't have the sword. It has its reputation. It has its credibility. It's got to be taken seriously by the people. Now, the rulings that it's been issuing are causing a lot of damage to that credibility, but not enough. The MAGA justices are operating in a way that is burning public trust, but it's not enough for them just to operate in the DC ecosystem. The people need to be able to draw a direct connection between the loss of their rights and the half dozen MAGA miniature senators in robes who are making these decisions and taking away rights. If the public doesn't pay attention to the court has nothing to fear. its reputation will be fine. Its power will be sturdy, and the MAGA justices will continue to pursue this far-right agenda. So the more that we hold the MAGA justices accountable, the more restrained they'll have to be. That's just where their power comes from. So we have a responsibility, as all of us looking to protect democracy, to focus attention on this. We need to make sure that everyone can make that direct connection between, hey, I'm losing my rights here because these half dozen MAGAs in robes just wrote a decision down. That's important, and it's not everywhere yet, but we have the power to make that understood everywhere. It's not just up to us, though. So this is where it comes back to the legislature. It's up to our representatives who we've put in power to exercise that power. We've got Democrats who head the Judiciary Committee in the Senate. They ought to use that power. There are opportunities in the short term and the long term. In the short term, we've been working with our indivisible groups in Illinois to push their friendly senator, Senator Dick Durbin, to use his power as chair of the Judiciary Committee to actually hold accountable these MAGA justices and the billionaires who subsidize their lifestyles, billionaires like Harlan Crow and Leonard Leo. There's work that can be done in the legislature right now. And in the long term, we're building for real structural change. The pressure today becomes tomorrow's policy change. The pressure today becomes tomorrow's policy change. That's why we've been working, like many folks on this call, to build support for substantial reform, imposing actual ethics requirements with teeth, unpacking the court so the MAGA majority in the court can't just run roughshod over the majority of Americans with this extremist ideology. Those are long-term goals. The way we get to those long-term goals is by short-term organizing. That's how we're actually going to be able to do this. The MAGA court, just to say again, their ideology, their policy, deeply, deeply unpopular. But there are more of us than there are of them. There are more of us than there are of them. There are more of us than there are of them. If you actually internalize that, our challenge is simply an organizing challenge. It's simply an organizing challenge. Get the people on our side and the rest will follow. That's why Indivisible is in this fight.
Oof. Thank you, Ezra. I think that's exactly the energy that we need moving forward. And, organizing wins, and that's what we know. And I know for our organization, what we're going to do is we're going to take this energy that we saw at our rally on Sunday, that we've heard on this panel, and we're going to hit the doors. We're planning on knocking tens of thousands of doors across Northeast Pennsylvania with this message and letting people know that there is something that they can do to stop the court's relentless power grab. So thank you to Ezra, Noel, Maggie, Yvonne, and Randy. Really appreciate it. Thank you for all of the work that you do, and just proud to be in this fight with you. And I will hand it back to Ashley to close us out.
Thank you so much. Okay, we know what we need to know now. So now I want to be very clear on how you can get engaged, a call to action. I believe organizing wins. That's how I started my career as an organizer. So we have to have some call to action. We want to make sure that we are protecting and delivering a court that protects our democracy, that is really a garden for fundamental freedoms, and not something that is just padding profits for big oil or the NRA and rolling back our freedoms for anti-abortion extremism. So it's time to ask our members of Congress who they stand with, and then get to work alongside those who stand with us. And that's what this campaign, Stop the Relentless Power Grab, is all about. So here are a couple calls to action. Get your text out, get your notepad thing in your phone out, if you want to write hand notes like I do, old school, go to relentlesspowergrab.com. That's relentlesspowergrab.com. There you can do a couple of things. You can sign up for updates and get mobilization opportunities. You can learn, use the tools on the website to email or tweet to your members of Congress. You can check out the toolkits that they have with resources so you can send postcards to your community, call scripts so you can call your friends and your local members of Congress so that you can ask them to protect our court. You can have door hangers. So if you want to canvass in your neighborhood and run your own canvas, you can hang hangers on your neighbors' doors. You could buy a yard sign. Who doesn't love a yard sign? Or rock a t-shirt, a good old activist t-shirt. But you can always find that at relentlesspowergrab.com. Keep an ear out for the other partners' works that they are doing, including our friends at Worker Power in Arizona and Action Together, NEPA in PA, who may be knocking on your doors or calling your phones. Answer, get engaged, volunteer. And then one of the easiest things you can do is tell 3 of your neighbors, tell 3 of your family, tell 3 of your friends to stop the power grab, and that it matters to you and that it should matter to them. I want to thank all of our speakers, but I also want to thank all of our partners for tonight. Action Together NEPA, Alliance for Justice, Albert Shanker Institute, Blue Futures, Brave New Films, Chopwood, Carry Water Daily Action, Climate Hawks Vote, Courage California, Center for Popular Democracy, Demand Justice, End Citizens United, Enough of Gun Violence, Equal Justice Society, Equal Grounds, Free Speech for People, Indivisible, League of Conservation Voters, Lucha, National Partnership for Women and Families, Peace Street, People Power United, Stand Up America, Supermajority, Take Back the Court Action Fund. You all have your calls to action. You know what we need to do. So let's get to work. Have a great night. And thank you so much.